So when someone brings up the topic of an E92 M3, one of the first things that people say is about the rod bearing, how it's some catastrophic issue, how you have to have them replaced, and how it's a big detrimental flaw in the E92 M3. And as much as people praise this car, it has that internal flaw that will always be there, and the only solution is to get them replaced. It also seems like everyone has a different opinion about the rod bearings in the E92 M3. The S65 motor revs to 8,400 RPM from the factory, and with a tune you can push it to 8,600. One of the highest revving V8s, one of the best sounding V8s, and one of the most fun to drive vehicles probably ever made. But what do you actually need to do about the rod bearings? So I'm no expert, but I have done some due diligence, talked to many E92 or E90 owners, and it seems like there is some sort of consensus. Essentially, a lot of it comes down to what year was your car built? What was the build date? Which means that'll tell you what kind of rod bearings you have. The E90, E92, and E93, M3, the first generation had copper rod bearings, and those were put into all of the cars up until 2010. Then they switched over to the aluminum bearings, which a lot of people will say if you have the aluminum bearings, which is part of the LCI model, built in 2011 and later, you are just fine. But then you'll hear the guys say, no matter what, these engines are hand built, and they're so tightly built that no matter what, at higher mileage, even if you have the aluminum bearings, you need to replace them. And then you'll have the guys saying, just do Blackstone tests. Now, Blackstone test is pretty much where you change your oil and you send out some oil to Blackstone Labs, and they tell you what's in the oil. If there's a lot of copper and you have copper rod bearings, that would be a good sign to change them as soon as possible. The aluminum, on the other hand, don't show any signs of wear for the most part. If you send your oil off to Blackstone, it doesn't even really matter what it says, because you're not going to see results in the oil from the aluminum bearings. So in a way, the later models can almost be more dangerous. So in my opinion, this is a very strong opinion, I would say if you have an earlier model, I would definitely do the Blackstone tests every few months or once a year. And if you have higher mileage, maybe over 50,000 miles, I would definitely consider getting the rod bearings done. If you have the aluminum bearings, I would say if you're at 60 or 70,000 miles, I would consider changing them regardless. And this all depends on the use of the car. If you're driving this car at the track and it's seeing a lot of red line, just based on the way that RPMs work in an engine, sort of the cubic formula of all of the stresses on the engine, higher RPMs are a lot more stressful on the engine than lower RPMs. Everyone knows that. So if you're driving around, if you're like me, you drive spiritedly, you drive it hard sometimes, but you don't always beat the crap out of it. I have 41,000 miles on my car, and I don't really plan to worry about the rod bearings till maybe 60,000. That's my personal preference. If you ask me, am I worried about rod bearings? No. I have a later model. They tend to have less issues, but that's not necessarily the case. But it's definitely something that you want to keep in mind. It still blows my mind that it always seems like an amazing engine or an amazing vehicle, whether it's the M3 or whether it's something else, there's always seems to be some Achilles heel to the car, where car enthusiasts just are willing to, risk it, or they just don't care, or they don't think it's a threat.
8,000 RPM!
I've seen cars that had the rod bearings done at 50,000 miles and they looked the same as other cars that were done at 95,000 miles. But I've also seen LCI rod bearings done at 100,000 miles and they didn't look that great. But one of the biggest things that I really can't forget to mention is the warm-up procedure. These cars are sensitive. Once they're warmed up, you can do whatever the heck you want with it. But do not push the S65 engine when it is not fully warm, because all the components need to be warm and they're very tight. And before you start to get close to redline, you definitely want to make sure that your car is at full operating temperature. I know it sounds silly, but this is a high performing V8 and highly revving car. So the least you can do is wait 7 minutes for the thing to warm up and then go about your day however the heck you want. But in the meantime, keep an eye on it and enjoy your car.